Well, good afternoon. We are so happy you have joined us again for the Southern area of the Links Incorporated Links in Pink Breast Cancer Awareness Series, Sisters Speak. I am Prasharon Dixon, your Health and Human Services Chair of the Southern area, and I'm joined by my lovely co-host, Deborah Sweeting, breast cancer survivor and member of the Treasure Coast, Florida chapter. This, of course, is an interactive venue, and we really want to get your questions. We have an expert here who's excited to answer all of them for you, and we know this particular topic is going to be of great importance as we work together.
Of course, we want you to enjoy your pink bag lunch while we provide you with news you can use. And as we work together to save the lives of the Black women we know and those we don't.
Well, now today's food for thought is clinical trials and Black women. We are the ones we've been waiting for. Now, Jillian Davis Morgan is our guest today. She is a member of the Links Wilmington, North Carolina chapter, and she holds a PhD in cancer pharmacology and works in breast cancer research and development, which makes her the perfect sister to speak to us today on the particulars of clinical trials and what Black women's participation means for the advancement of breast cancer care. Welcome, Jillian.
Thank you, Dr. Prasharon. It is my pleasure to be here with you today and also with you, Deborah, the butterfly warrior. I had an opportunity. I had an opportunity to tune in to your podcast 2 weeks ago, and what a story of perseverance during the pandemic with your new diagnosis of breast cancer at the time. So I am honored to be here with both of you today to talk about a very important topic around clinical trials in the African American community.
Thank you. So, Dr. Jillian, my treatment was complicated by the fact that I had a previous cancer history. So I was offered immunotherapy in conjunction with chemotherapy. And as you know, immunotherapy is fairly new modality for the triple negative breast cancer, discovered as an option through clinical trials. So I am very interested in your perspective today. Could you share with the audience, what exactly is the definition of a clinical trial?
Yes, sure. So great question and great place to start. So a clinical trial is just a research study that involves people. So research runs the gamut. It is a very lengthy process, starting with research in the laboratory with cells. And then once safety and efficacy is determined in cells, we move those treatments into animals and animal models. And then once we develop safety in those animal models, we move into treatment of actual patients and move into a human population. And that is what a clinical trial is. It is taking that bench research that we did in cells and animals and moving it into people. And as you mentioned with immunotherapy, it is through clinical trials that we are able to develop new treatment therapies and modalities for all cancers, but breast cancer specifically.
Okay, well, it's awesome to know there are Black women like you working on the very interventions we need. I mean, I don't think that it's readily known out there since you and your colleagues are not, in the public view. They're not in the public face.
Yes, that you're right. You're right, and I hope that. Okay, so here's a photo of me in the lab. So as I mentioned, I start off with research in the lab with tissues and cells, and some of those are donated tissue and cells, which I think we'll talk about a little later. But I do think that it is important to talk about the increased number of African American scientists and researchers, African American clinicians. And I hope that by having this conversation and seeing these brown faces, it will encourage more African American women and women of color to participate in clinical trials when they know that there's someone that looks like them behind the scenes doing some of the work. So maybe they'll be more inclined to participate when we ask.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Hey, Deborah and Jillian, this kind of reminds me of what our folks, when we talk about our folks, like to see. If you go into a restaurant and they've got some barbecue going and some potato salad, we always talk about we don't eat everybody's potato salad.
Oh no.
We've got to look in the back and to see who's cooking. So
That's
Dr. Jillian, it's good to know you're in the back cooking.
That's
I'm in,
right.
I'm in the back cooking. I've got the potato salad with the red lid on top. I think you can trust it.
I love it.
I'm cooking it up in the back, Dr. Sharon. I'm cooking it up in the back.
All right. All right.
So, Dr. Jillian, please share with our audience what is the importance of clinical trials?
Yeah, so good question. And again, back to your immunotherapy. So, the importance is for us to advance science, so we can advance our treatment protocols. We can come up with agents and chemotherapy and combinations that are more effective. And often the goal is to also come up with therapies that are less side effects, have a better side effect profile. So, we know with chemotherapy, there are a lot of side effects. We're killing both our normal cells and the cancer cells. And so there are a lot of side effects that go along with chemotherapy when we're killing those rapidly proliferating cells. And so part of the goal of clinical trials is to find drugs that are less toxic to our normal cells, which is a lot of what I do in my laboratory. Also, though the importance of clinical trials too is to know whether these drugs are effective in the specific patient population. And this is where the importance of African American participation comes in, because it's difficult to determine whether or not a drug is effective in a Black woman with breast cancer if we don't have Black women participating in our trials. And this is, so I really want to bring home the point that we really need our women of color to participate in trials. And ironically, this morning in my inbox was an article from one of my medical journals, and the article was entitled "Breast Cancer, Breast Cancer in Black Women. Physicians do not know enough." And it caught my eye, and it was very interesting. And the article was based on a Twitter discussion that occurred over the summer, where an African-American breast cancer agency asked the question, why is triple negative breast cancer more common in African-American women? Mm-hmm. What is the data around that? And the physician responded back to say, I really don't know. And I'm embarrassed to say that I don't know, but we don't have enough data. And so it generated all these hashtags, Black Data Matters, diversity in clinical trials. So having a diverse spectrum of people participate in our trials is very, very important. There's no way to know if Tylenol works in a Black woman if we never test Tylenol in a Black woman. And the same goes for our chemotherapy.
Well, that makes perfect sense. And with that being said, at what rate do African Americans participate in clinical trials in general?
It's a troubling number. So while the incidence of breast cancer in African American women is slightly lower than in Caucasian women, the mortality rate is almost 40% higher. But our participation in trials is only 10%.
Oh, gosh.
Only 10%. And I think that when we look at those mortality rates, it's multifactorial, but, some of it may be late diagnosis, some of it may be genetics. But I also think that it's important for us to think about the effectiveness of these drugs on our Black women. And if we don't participate in trials, we can't know how effective it is in our own bodies. We only know how effective it is in those that participate in the trials. And if those are Caucasian women, then we only know that these drugs work in Caucasian women. So we really have to consider participating in trials at a number greater than 10%, please.
Well, I tell you what, the pandemic really has been, while problematic, it also has exposed a lot of things, right? The inequities in our community, but also it's exposed people to this thing we call clinical trials, as we had to do that really quickly and get as many people in as we could. And I believe it really gave people an opportunity like no other to understand that concept and what it means. I know there were many companies like Pfizer and Moderna and J&J that tried to make sure African Americans and other people of color were a part of the clinical trials, but it seems like they really still struggled to get the numbers that they need. Why do you think we as a people are so resistant to clinical trials?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And you're right. The pandemic really brought attention and a spotlight to clinical trials and that whole research process. And I think being able to have the head of the Moderna vaccine trial be an African-American woman, and to hear Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett talk about all her work. And she talks a lot, if you listen to her talk, she talks a lot about the amount of time that she spent in the lab working on this virus long before, it was a pandemic and before it moved into clinical trials. And so that's a good, kind of timeline for us to understand that it's a long process. So before we even started talking about vaccines, we've been working on it in the lab for a long time. And so I think she kind of helped to develop trust in the African-American community, to see her talk about it, because I think historically there's been a mistrust of the medical community by African Americans, dating back to the Tuskegee experiment, to Henrietta Lacks. We just have a mistrust for the medical community, and understandably so. But I think we really, have to kind of change that narrative and move towards understanding trials and how it benefits us more. We've all got grandmas that say, oh, don't go under the knife and don't let them put you under, all this anesthesia. We have these inherent barriers to medicine and the medical community. But I think being able to see Dr. Corbett and other women and men of color as researchers, as scientists, as clinicians, will help to build trust in our community so that we can really increase our numbers of participation in clinical trials.
Yeah, so it still goes back to that analogy of the potato salad, right? You're back there mixing, making sure it's good. And we're looking back there to see who's doing it.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, we can't boo-boo down the street cooking because boo-boo. We need the grandma that's been working on it for 10 years.
That's right.
That's right. That's exactly right.
When it comes to the table, we know it's right.
We know it's right. And you're right. And I think that was important to have Dr. Corbett come forward. And I'm glad that you invited me to speak today, because I think if you see people that look like you, then you're kind of like you said, you're like, okay, I think we might be all right. It might be. I think I might can trust Dr. Jill. I don't know. I might can trust her.
Yeah. So Jillian, give us a little bit more. What are the types of clinical trials?
Okay, sure. So the ones that I think most of us are familiar with and that immediately comes to mind when we think about clinical trials are what we call interventional trials. Mm-hmm. And those are trials where you're actually giving a drug, or you're testing a new agent. So that there's an intervention, there's a medical intervention. And I think when people typically become skeptical about interventional trials is they think about that placebo. And, they're going to give me that sugar pill. I don't want that sugar pill. It doesn't work. I'm going to be, even sicker. But what I want to point out about oncology trials is that it is rare, extremely rare, almost unheard of to have a placebo trial in an oncology study, because it is considered unethical to withhold treatment from a cancer patient. Okay. Now, in the rare instance that there is a placebo trial, it is really determined on the stage of, that patient, where they are in their treatment, and they are informed. They have to sign a consent form to, state that I understand that this is a placebo trial. But again, that is extremely, extremely rare in oncology. So more often than not, you will not participate in a placebo trial. You will not get a sugar pill. So what you will be getting is standard of care in one arm. So standard of care, which is what is currently being used to treat your breast cancer, versus whatever the new agent is. So that is what an interventional trial is. Then we also have what we call preventative trials. And this is when we're looking to find ways to prevent the disease overall. So tamoxifen is a good example of a preventative trial. So tamoxifen was in what we call the STAR trial for decades, to see if giving tamoxifen to high-risk women would, for 5 years, would diminish their possibility of developing breast cancer. So that was a preventative trial. And then we also have quality of life trials. So these trials are looking to see how can we make the patient more comfortable? How can we lessen their side effects? How can we improve their nutrition? So those are looking at quality of life and how to better make the patient comfortable and make their life day-to-day better. So those are kind of the main ones.
Okay, so let's talk about a little bit of what actually happens in a trial. Can you kind of walk us through the steps? Like, how do we even find out there is a trial? And then if we know about it, how are we selected for it?
Sure. So that's a good question. And, I would say that the first way to find out about a trial is to talk to your physician, your healthcare professional, your oncologist. Ask them, are they currently participating in any breast cancer trials? And if they're not themselves participating in a trial, ask if they are aware of any ongoing trials that you may be a good candidate for. And so, as it pertains to the participation and the enrolling process, we have what we call the principal investigator. So that's like the head physician in charge. And they are responsible for writing the plan for the study, which would include how long is the study going to last? How many patients do we need in the study? What types of criteria do the patients need to have to be eligible for the study? So that could include age. Sometimes we only look at a certain age group. That could be your stage of cancer. That's an eligibility criteria. What type of cancer you have. So talking to your physician about that, they'll go through all those eligibility criteria with you. And then if you are a good candidate for a particular trial, then you'll go through what's called the informed consent process. And this is really important. And I think this is the key to keeping things like Tuskegee from happening again. So this outlines everything that's going to happen in the trial, what's going to happen to you, what drugs you're going to get, how often you're going to come in. And you sign this consent form to say that you've read it, you understand, and you get to take that home with you, mull it over, keep it throughout the duration of the trial so that you can always refer back to it. And so also, as far as marketing is concerned, you may see trial flyers at your hospital. Another good resource is to visit the National Cancer Institute, their website. They will have listings of trials as well.
Okay.
So I wanted to say, when you get diagnosed, there are so many shocks for you once you receive a breast cancer or any kind of a cancer diagnosis. And that certainly includes thinking about your own mortality. What will happen to me? What will happen to your family? How will you support your family financially, etc. So adding on the request to consider a clinical trial may seem a bit daunting. So I guess my question is, what types of questions should people consider asking regarding a trial?
That is a really good point, Deborah. It is a lot to take in, for a patient who's been diagnosed and then someone to say, hey, how about do a trial as well? And so it is a lot. And so I always encourage patients, whenever you go in, for a doctor visit, bring your notebook so that you can write down questions, ask questions, and specifically about clinical trials, come with tons of questions. I always say, ask questions about side effects. What are the potential side effects of this new agent that you're going to be trying? Is the side effect profile for this new one any different from the current ones on the market? And if so, how? How are those side effects different? What is the prevalence of those side effects? How frequently, do you see them? What are the signs and symptoms of the side effects? How do I know, if I'm experiencing a side effect? And who do I contact if I think that I am? So those are good questions around side effects. Other good questions are around monitoring, asking, what are you going to be monitoring for? Are you going to be drawing blood? Are you going to be doing tissue samples? How often will I have to come in for this monitoring? Is it, are these additional doctor visits? Will I come to your office? Is there another place that I'll have to go to? So asking questions around monitoring and monitoring frequency, I think are important questions. I also tell people to ask these questions about credentials and specializations. Ask these doctors, what are your specializations? Let me see your credentials. You want to make sure you trust them and you have a good team. So don't shy away from those questions. Ask them what makes you qualified to do this study. Because I have a good friend who was getting her father into an Alzheimer's trial. And so she starts asking these questions about the physicians in your background, and come to find out they did not have specializations in Alzheimer's and dementia. And she said, no, thank you. So you have to ask those questions, and it's okay to say, no, I don't want to participate, or no, I don't want to feel comfortable, but make an educated decision, ask those questions. Another good question to ask is around cost. Oftentimes, your clinical trial treatments are covered by your insurance, or it may be covered by a grant that the physician has received to do the trial. So a lot of it is covered, but sometimes if you have to come in for additional monitoring or additional treatments, Some of that may not be. And so you want to ask the physician about that. You want to ask about stipends. Often they may give a stipend to help with that. They may give stipends to help with transportation, to those additional visits. So ask those questions. And another cost related question to ask is, if you're on the trial
Mhm.
and the drug is being provided to you free as a trial participant, what happens when the trial ends? How do I then pay for my medication once the trial is over? So ask those questions as well. Cost related questions are also important to ask.
Mhm.
I think another important thing to add in there is that as a physician, um, that your care with your primary physician doesn't stop.
Right.
Like, you're
Oh,
not just transferred over to the person doing the clinical trial. You're still going to be with your primary care
mhm.
doctor in addition to doing your clinical trial. So
That's right. In addition to the
Absolutely.
research team. And that's a good point. And you know what? That brings me to another point that I wanted to mention is that you can also ask the physician, is there someone who's currently participating in the trial that I can talk to?
oh
Ah,
yes.
yeah.
So you may have to, they'll have to ask permission to consent, for HIPAA, but ask, is there someone currently participating in the trial that I can talk to a little bit about it? I want a little more information. I want a first person experience and recount. And that is a question that you can ask as well. So don't be shy to ask your questions.
I'm curious, are there any breast cancer drugs currently in clinical trials?
Yes, ton. Yes. And so right now there are over 5,000 clinical trials open in the breast
Wow.
cancer space. Yes. And 1,000 of those are currently enrolling. So what that means is that the other 4,000 are ongoing. They're currently ongoing. They already have their patient population established, but
Okay.
the other 1,000 are still recruiting for patients. So there are at least 1,000 trials just here in the US that are currently recruiting for patients. And of that, 500 of them are about triple negative breast cancer. So there are 500 trials right now looking at triple negative breast cancer.
Wow, that's huge. And
Yeah, yeah,
it
that's
is,
a large
and it's
number.
also attributed because of you and your colleagues, great work that has changed tremendously over the years and advanced the cancer treatments. I also have a pharmaceutical sales background,
Well,
and we always have to address doctors discussing the efficacy of drugs, its
yeah.
safety and everything else. So that was a main part of my conversations with physicians, nurse practitioners, pharmacists, you name it. So that's good to hear.
Yes, absolutely. And those are the key things we're looking at: efficacy and safety.
Yeah.
Really. Yeah.
Yeah, so again, it is so important for us to know about that. I mean, I don't even know that I know I didn't know that there were 500 clinical trials just waiting for us to be a part of. So I hope you're hearing that, Facebook friends. And if you have been diagnosed with breast cancer, of course, we want to catch it early, but we also want to help each other if you can. So
Yeah.
think about that when you're talking to your doctor. And that kind of brings us to our survivor speak story for today. It's kind of reflective of those changes in medication from over time. Our sister today, who we're going to feature, is Sister Joyce Burton from our Gulf Coast, Mississippi chapter. Let's listen into her story now.
Joyce Burton, a two-time breast cancer survivor. I was diagnosed in 1998 the first time, and my lump was found by my OBGYN. I had gone in September for my mammogram, and when it came back, it was negative. I went in for my OBGYN appointment, and the doctor found the lump. At that time, they ran up a bunch of tests, and Wednesday before Thanksgiving, I got a call from the doctor saying that it was positive. I did not tell my family because I did not want to upset them. I am the youngest of 12 children, 5 girls. Out of the 5 girls, 3 have had breast cancer. My oldest sister died at the age of 50 from breast cancer. My middle sister is a 3-time survivor of breast cancer, and I am a 2-time survivor. The first time was in 1998, and the second time was in 2015. The first time I had a mastectomy, and at that time I was really sick. I was on a trial. I lost about 50 pounds. I lost all of my hair. I come from a praying family. So with prayers from my church, my sorority, and my family, I survived. 17 and a half years later, I went to the doctor and had another mammogram, and they thought they saw a lump, but they wasn't for sure. So they said we need to do an ultrasound. Again, I was called and it was positive. At that time, I had 4 rounds of chemo, but today I'm still alive. I am a living testimony for the mighty God we serve. It's important that you get your yearly mammogram and do your monthly check. If your birthday is in October, use that as a date for your mammogram.
Wow. Wow. Her story really highlights the importance of clinical trials. And, it is her courageous participation in that trial that has helped to advance our breast cancer therapies and treatments. And honestly, it is likely what shortened the course of her treatment with her second diagnosis. So she was able to go from 8 rounds of chemo to 4 rounds of chemo. And I'm certain that it is her participation in that trial that helped to advance those treatments and lessen her course of treatment the second time around. Wow, what a story.
And I know Joyce well, and know that first round for her was really difficult.
Yeah.
She hung on to life in that first time, and but then 17 years later, not that you want to get it again,
Mhm.
but to know that you were down now to 4 rounds,
Right. Yes. Yes.
in a much easier time.
Yeah.
So yes,
Yes.
thank you, Joyce, for
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
your
For your
courageous
courage.
story.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Now, we've been speaking about a lot of great work that comes from research, and we wanted to take a little moment, Facebook friends, to share with you a little tidbit that we have today. Next month, our organization and several across the world will participate in National Donor Sabbath. This is a 3-day observance that occurs the 2 weekends before before Thanksgiving. And this is where faith leaders, donor families, transplant recipients, and donation and transplant professionals participate in services and programs to educate our public about the need for transplantation and to encourage people to register their decision to be an organ, eye, and tissue donor. As you can guess, the participation of African Americans is extremely low. So, we've talked about medicines and clinical trials. There are also trials involving medical devices, such as those needed for women who are receiving reconstruction after a mastectomy. We have a picture of a product now. Let's see here. So this is what's known as a tissue expander, and it is the one that Deborah here received during her reconstruction. What you should also notice is that this tissue expander, if you see on there, was made possible through donated tissue.
Mhm.
So being a donor really provides support in so many different ways
Mhm.
that you may have never ever thought of.
Mhm.
That is why my commercial now is to support yet another link program called Linkages to Life, where we're encouraging citizens to become donors for very reasons like this. And between our donations and research and interventions in medicine and new devices, we support life for those we love.
Yes.
And in this case, for the women in our lives who fought and won this extraordinary battle. So that's my commercial. Just wanted to get that there. Deborah, tell me a little bit about that for you when you realized that you were getting a tissue expander that was made possible for you by a donor.
When you think about organ donation, you tend to think about the huge ones, right? Like a kidney transplant, a lung transplant. You don't think about things like tissue grafting or skin grafting that's used in common everyday surgeries to enhance the benefit to the patient, to help them to heal better. And in this instance, that's what the breast expander did. They remove all of your breast tissue, so then you start with an expander. And they increase the expander gradually, stretching your skin back out so that you can have implants then put in for your reconstruction surgery. So that was the process, and I'm very grateful. It's like you said, it's the gift of life that keeps on giving, and actually, it's a beautiful thing. Although it's scary to think about, it is beautiful because it helps the person who passed. It helps their life to matter in death as it did when they were living, and that's powerful.
That
After
is.
you are gone, you are still giving to help to make someone else's life better who needs it, and that's what it's about. And in that case, I was a recipient, and I'm very grateful. And I hope that we will, as a community, start to support organ donations more because it's needed.
Absolutely. And even with organ and tissue donation and clinical trials, our numbers just across the board for participation are low. And as you said, it helps other people that look like us when we participate in donation trials, tissue donation, clinical trials. It helps to advance science for ourselves, and I think maybe if we look at it like I'm helping someone that looks like me, maybe we'll give it a second thought. Tissue donation, organ donation, clinical trials. Our numbers are low, and we really need to increase that to help those that look like us.
So I know I've been checking, and we don't have any questions yet. I think this has been such a powerful discussion. The ladies are just taking it in. They get all of their get everything in. So look, I'm going to give a challenge out to our Facebook sisters who are part of the Links organization. Send me a question at hhs@salinksinc.org, hhs@salinksinc.org. First one to send me a question, I'm going to send you a little Links in Pink pen.
Wow.
I want one of those. I was talking to Deborah earlier. I said, I want your pen. I remember seeing it in the boutique online when I ordered my T-shirt, but I didn't order the pen. And now I see you ladies in your pen, and I want one too. So maybe
your pen is coming. It's
all right.
Right to you.
While we're waiting on questions, Jillian, is there anything else you would like to share with our audience as a takeaway or a charge to leave them with today?
Yeah, sure. So, I really just encourage our women of color to consider a trial. There are a host of trials, and they're listed on clinicaltrials.gov, which is listed up on the screen now. So you can visit www.clinicaltrials.gov to take a look at open trials. There also the National Cancer Institute at www.cancer.gov is also a good resource. And they actually even have an online chat option where you can chat online with someone from the National Cancer Institute about ongoing trials and ask them questions. So that's also a great resource and quick chat. You can also call the National Cancer Institute directly and talk to them. But I encourage, everyone, when you're talking with your physician and your clinician, ask them about clinical trials and ask them to explain it to you. Ask tons of questions so that you're comfortable and you understand. I just encourage us to not say no out of the gate. Don't say no out of the gate. Ask questions and then really seriously consider it, because it advances our science. It helps women that look like us. And, as I say, there's no way to know if Tylenol works in a Black woman unless we have a Black woman in the Tylenol trial. And the same goes for our cancer drugs. We don't know for sure if it works in Black women if we don't participate in the trials.
Well, ladies, that looks like that's our takeaway for today. Living longer after a cancer diagnosis and decreasing death are directly correlated with clinical trial activity. And we want to make sure that we hope we've given you some food for thought, that you're ready to take on that challenge. We don't have any more questions yet, Deborah. So
no, okay, all right. Well, Facebook family, for Sharon and I will be back next week when our expert will speak to us about equity for Black women as it relates to breast cancer. Jillian, we thank you so much for your informative lunch and learn.
Thank you so much for having me, and I hope that this conversation will encourage more women to think about trials. And as Dr. Prasharan said, see that we're cooking it up in the back. We're cooking it up in the back. The potato salad is good. The potato salad is good. So consider a clinical trial.
Well, I do want to congratulate my sister Stephanie Palmer, who reached out on my HHS.
All right.
She wants her pin.
So we're going to make sure she gets a pin today. And we have answered all our questions. I'm hearing we're getting some great comments on our Facebook and our YouTube. So thank you again, Jillian. Now, look, we look forward to seeing all of you next week. Same time, same place. And as we say each week, there's nothing like hearing a sister speak.